Today we're going to be working on my 1977 280Z. We're going to be installing a front spoiler that I picked up off Craigslist. It was previously installed, so it has some extra holes in it, but we're going to modify those and get it all to fit. Since the previous owner removed the bumper, access to the 10mm bolts that hold the lower valance to the headlight are pretty easy. There's a captive nut that's attached to the valance itself, so these can just be unscrewed from the front without having to put a wrench around the back. The next two bolts attach the fender to the valance. They can only be unscrewed from the top part, but you have to slide underneath to hold the nut steady while you're unscrewing it. This uses a clip nut that we'll actually be reusing later on once we put the spoiler on. If you can't see the back of your headlight bucket, you may need to remove your fender well guard. The next two bolts can be accessed from the front. I used a socket for the back one, but I needed a ratcheting wrench for the front one. There's not a lot of clearance there, and if you have any damage done to your valance, it'll be a little tricky to get this one out. Once these last two bolts are removed, the valance should slide out relatively easy. I'm going to lower the spoiler into place just to give it a test fit. I determined I didn't have to remove the center section of the valance. This will actually give me some area to attach the spoiler to and give it a little bit more support in the middle. I'm going to tape up the edges of the spoiler, this way I don't scratch up the paint. This was a used spoiler that I picked up off Craigslist, so it already had some holes drilled in it, but they're probably not going to align with my headlight buckets. I'm not worried about the bumper being perfect. The car paint isn't perfect, but for right now this is the nicest painted part on my whole car. I grabbed a couple of self-tapping screws. I'm going to use these through the existing holes that are in the spoiler. This way I can kind of see how the alignment works on my car. This bumper is plastic urethane instead of fiberglass, so it's notoriously floppy, so I'm going to make sure that it's very rigid once it's attached. This gives us our first good look at the front end with the spoiler attached. I'll be installing a skillet grill at a later time. I removed the screws, and now I'm just using a little bit of touch-up paint on the car. Eventually the entire car will get painted, but when the bumper was removed there was a little bit of discoloration and surface rust underneath it. This will help protect the metal from any further damage. It turns out some of the holes did line up with my existing headlight buckets, but the size of the hole is a little small. I can only assume the previous owner installed this with some self-tapping screws, so I'm going to use the original OEM bolts, so I need to open these holes up a little bit bigger. The factory lower valance had retaining nuts that held these OEM bolts in place. Since we're not using them anymore, I put some locking washers and some stainless steel nuts along the backside. I removed the tape and continued to check the fitment along the edge. The passenger side hole didn't line up at all, so I drill a new one. The next hole doesn't line up at all either, so I have to drill a whole new hole for it. Another OEM bolt, and a stainless nut and lock washer on the back. I'm loosely snugging these bolts up so I have some adjustment. Back onto the driver's side. Helps if my drill bit is actually attached to the chuck. One last OEM bolt. spoiler is very rigid now. I get underneath the car and drill one more hole into the spoiler. This will be for the piece that attaches the spoiler to the fender. Previously there were 2 bolts, but in this setup there's only going to be 1. I'm reusing one of the old OEM clip nuts that was here before. Now onto the passenger side. The same process is repeated. Time to snug all the bolts. I get a 10mm wrench around the backside of each one of the bolts. The drill makes quick work of locking all these bolts down. I don't over tighten them, just enough to make sure that they won't come loose later. I then repeat the steps on the driver's side, and we're just about done. Eventually, I'm going to add 2 more bolts to this front area, but it's pretty stable as it is. I'm going to wait until the skillet grille comes in before I do that part. There we go, everything buttoned up. It really changes the look of the car. This is one of the easier modifications I've ever done on any car. If you have any questions or comments about how this install was done, please comment below, and also like and subscribe, or don't, I don't give a shit.